condescending way that he just spews this poison out is very, very dangerous, because he won't stop Trump, but he's going to outlive Trump by about 50 years. And you're watching the rise of an American demagogue that is a very, very despicable person. Yeah. And I was shaking listening to him talk, because a lot of people don't know that is one step away from Nazi propaganda coming out of his mouth.
So a few weeks ago, Van Jones on CNN told the world that Vivek Ramaswamy is a dangerous demagogue whose rhetoric is almost on par with Nazi propaganda. So let that sink in. Van Jones, of all people, coming out and calling somebody else a demagogue. The race-baiting huckster himself coming out, oh, these people are engaging in demagoguery. What's the irony of Van Jones coming out and accusing Vivek Ramaswamy of being a demagogue? But the irony is that Van Jones engages in demagoguery all the time. In fact, you could certainly find examples of demagoguery on either side of the aisle. So, like, no side is perfectly squeaky clean on this, but Democrats in general, demagoguery is their whole stick. Appeals to emotion. That's all identity politics is demagoguery. You know, you get in front of this group and you tell them, oh, the world's unfair, everybody's against you. It's those other people over there. You know, whether it's along the lines of sex, say the way they represent the gender pay gap would be a perfect example.
Some say there isn't really a gender pay gap. Well, that is just wrong. The typical woman working full-time in 2014 was paid 79% of what men were paid.
Women are saying, Bernie, how does it happen that I work in an office, I work in a plant, and I get paid 79 cents on the dollar compared to the guy in the other office doing the same work? And you know what the answer to that question is? It is old-fashioned sexism. That's
demagoguery on display. And as late as 2016, you had Democrat hopefuls coming out and talking about the gender pay gap, intentionally trying to incite a reaction from women. Oh, the life's so unfair. We live in a patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm sure in a nation of 330 million people, you can find some examples of sexism and where women are discriminated against, but you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. The demagogue doesn't want to do that. They just want to say, like, there's a blanket of systemic sexism out there keeping women down. When you actually look at the gender pay gap, basically to get a 22 or 23% gender pay gap between males and females, you basically have to not control for any variables at all other than comparing the average full-time female and her earnings to the average full-time male, which doesn't account for real basic things like occupational choice. Like if you actually compared men and women doing the same type of job, well then the gender pay gap basically disappears. If you compare like male teachers to female teachers, there isn't a 22% gender pay gap between them. And you also got to control for things like total number of hours worked, which you think would be an obvious thing to control for, but if you do those two things, you control for occupational choice and total number of hours worked, well then the gender pay gap disappears, and then you can't come out and say there's a 22% difference between what males and females work. So that would just be one example of Democrats in this country engaging in demagoguery. Race is another one, and that's, you know, the specialty of people like Van Jones.
But it was also something else. We've talked about race. I mean, we've talked about everything but race tonight. We've talked about income. We've talked about class. We've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes.
Rather than view people as individuals and judging them on their own merits, I mean, their whole shtick is lumping people together based on their immutable characteristics and then trying to manipulate those groups by appealing to commonly perceived injustices in those communities. Say, police brutality and how it affects the black community would be a good example. Now, you can look at the actual data and see that more white people are killed by police officers every year than are black people in America. And then you can break it down and look at individual cases where people are killed by the police, and you'll see that the vast majority of them are justified. It's people fighting with police, violently resisting arrest. Most of the people that are killed by police are armed when they're killed by police, and even in the cases where they're unarmed, a lot of times unarmed doesn't mean not dangerous. I mean, if you're taking swings at a guy's head, that's a potentially fatal situation. I mean, more people die in this country every year being struck with hands and feet than are killed by rifles in this country. And if you're wrestling with a cop, especially if you're reaching for his weapon, I mean, it definitely is still a dangerous situation, whether or not you happen to be armed at that moment or not. So again, you got to look at everything by a case-by-case basis and not view it through the prism of, oh, I support the cops, so the cops are always right, or I'm black, so I'm always going to side with the black guy in an altercation between the police and a man who happens to be black. I mean, that's the stupid way to approach anything. You should look at the facts of the particular case. But demagoguery is more concerned with lumping people together and viewing everything in the light of identity.
That guy is dangerous. That's dangerous. When those people were saying Jews will not replace us, Jews will not replace us, that slogan sits on top of a very sick and twisted view that if you bring enough people of color here, we are so deficient, we are so stupid, we are so unwanted that we will be zombies to fill out the ranks for some Democratic Party agenda that Jewish people are manipulating and driving forward. That leads to violence. That puts at risk Jewish people. That puts at risk people of color. It is wrong. And the smug, condescending way that he just spews this poison out is very, very dangerous.
I don't even know what he's talking about. I have never heard anybody say, the Jews will not replace us, until I heard it come out of Van Jones' mouth in this clip. It's like QAnon. The only time I ever hear the term QAnon now is like when a Democrat is talking about it in the context that he thinks that's what Republicans talk about. Like, I live in a conservative area around a lot of people that support Trump, and if they don't support Trump, a lot of them like Vivek. And I've never heard any of them say anything about the Jews will not replace us. Now, in some obscure random corner of the internet, could you probably find something like that? I'm sure you could, but that doesn't mean it's at all representative of what is mainstream. I've certainly never heard Vivek say anything about the Jews will not replace us. So maybe Vivek had the right response.
Character Van Jones on CNN afterwards saying, this is the rise of an American demagogue who's going to live 50 years longer than Trump. This is dangerous. I am shaking. That's what he says. Just shut the up. At a certain point, just shut the up.
You've been watching the Fletch Report. If you're hearing this, it means you've made it to the end of the video. But before you click onto the next thing and continue down whatever rabbit hole you're on YouTube or Rumble, I've got a small favor to ask. If you found value in my content and you want to help the channel out, the best thing you can do is share it with somebody else that you think will find value in it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Links to the channel on YouTube and Rumble will be provided below. Additionally, I'm making a Facebook page for the channel as well as a X/formerly Twitter. Feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, provided in the description below will be a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is the online equivalent of a tip jar. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the channel.